Hello, creative and crafty people. I hope y'all are doing well today. In this video, I'm going to show you how I created these fun copper and Imperial blue Jasper beaded earrings. I will be using Imperial blue Jasper beads, but keep in mind that you can choose any type of beads you'd like to make your piece unique. And you can also use any wire such as silver, gold, or even platinum. There are many different types of wire out there. I use copper for its cost effectiveness and its ease of use, especially if I'm just practicing. So as we get ready to create these earrings, remember, this is your creation and you get to create it the way you like it. If you like to learn how I created these super cute earrings, then stick around and let's get creating. The materials we're going to need for this project are as follows. We're going to need 18 gauge wire, 6 pieces cut at 8 centimeters in length. We'll need some 20 gauge wire, 2 pieces cut at 4.5 centimeters in length. We are going to need some 20 gauge wire. Pictured here is 6 20 gauge wires all at the same length, but we actually need 4 pieces cut at 4 centimeters in length, and then we also need some 18 gauge wire cut at 4 centimeters in length, so not all 20 gauge wire. Hopefully that makes sense. Next, we need 2 6mm Imperial blue Jasper beads and 4 4mm Imperial Jasper beads, but remember, you can choose whichever beads you would like to use in your project. You're going to need some chain nose pliers, some bent chain nose pliers, flat head pliers, looping pliers, a pair of flush cutters. We'll need a ring mandrel with the measurements on here, the ring measurements. You'll need a chasing hammer, a bench block, a cup burr. If you don't have a cup burr, you can use a file, but we'll also need the file for this project as well. This concludes the materials you'll need for this project. If you miss something, you can either go back and rewatch this part of the tutorial, or you can check out the materials list in the description down below this video. Now let's get this show on the road and start creating. So now we need to grab those 6 pieces of 18 gauge wire cut at 8 centimeters in length. And we're also going to grab our ring mandrel with the ring size markings on the mandrel. Some of these mandrels don't have ring size markings, so that's why I'm saying with the markings. And we're going to place our 18 gauge wire centered right on that 7 mark, size 7 mark on the ring mandrel. And then we're going to wrap those wires around this mandrel as tightly as possible, making sure you hold the back side of those wires tight up against the mandrel. And then we're going to splay the right side of these wires apart, and we're going to make those wires go on either side of the left side of the wires, like so. And then we're going to push it up tight against the mandrel and pull it off, and here you have your rings. Now we're going to grab our second set of wires and the ring mandrel, and this time we're going to go to the size 2 on the ring mandrel. And we're going to center that on the size 2 line. And we're going to bring those all the way around, wrap them around the ring mandrel. Pressing that wire up against the ring mandrel with my finger, I'm going to push those 2 and put the left side in the center of the 2 right side wires. And we're going to press that right down against the ring mandrel, like so. And we're just going to make sure all that wire was pressed up tightly, and we're at the size 2 on the ring mandrel. And then we're going to pull this off, and there's our second set of circles. And now we're grabbing our third set of wires, and this time we're going to use our looping pliers. The ring mandrel did not go small enough, and we are going to make some 9mm rings. So grabbing the end of these two 18 gauge wires, we're going to wrap those wires around that 9mm mandrel on the looping pliers. We're going to bring it all the way around till those wires touch, and then we're going to splay the ends of these longer wires. Bring one around the bottom and one over the top of the wires that are on the mandrel until they cross over each other. And then we're going to pull this off, and there we have 2 more loops. Now we're going to take our flush cutters, and we're going to flush cut the end of this ring to make sure we got a nice flush cut there. And then we're going to flip the ring over, and with the flush side facing the ring, we're going to flush cut. Now notice these flush cutters are lined up perfectly with the flush cut we already did. And you kind of want to do that. It makes it so that when you push these 2 wires back together or twist them back together, they are right up there next to each other, just like that. And you get your perfect little circle there. And we're going to do the same thing with this one. So again, flush cut the end, making sure we have a nice straight flush cut. Making sure you hold those flush cutters nice and straight when you do this, so you don't have any angle and you won't have any gaps whenever you put the ring together. Same thing, we're going to turn our flush cutters around and flush cut the other end of that wire. And now when we twist this wire back into place, those wires come right up to each other, like so. And we're going to do the same thing with the remaining 4 rings here, but I did that off camera, and they're all done. Now we're going to take the 2 smaller rings and my bench block and the chasing hammer, and we're going to hammer these little rings out. 1, it hardens the rings, and 2, it just provides a nice little flat surface for the light to reflect off of. It just gives an extra added little shimmer to your piece. You don't have to do this step, but I like to do that, and it also hardens the piece. And we're going to do the same thing with all the rings. And there you can see that light shimmering off of there. And while I was hammering, these did come apart a little bit, and I did go ahead and put them back on the looping pliers to kind of make sure they're nice and tight, so you can do that. And there you can see how they just come right up to each other, and you can almost not see where they connect. And there's all 6 loops all done. Now we're going to grab our 20 gauge wire that was cut at 4.5 centimeters and our looping pliers. Typically with earrings I use the 2mm mandrel, but this one we're going to use the 3mm mandrel, and you'll see why here in just a moment. So we're going to grab those wires right by the tail end and then wrap both those wires together around the mandrel until the ends of these wires meet back up with itself, creating a perfect little loop at the end of your wires. And then I struggle to get that plier out of the loops. And there's the end there. The nice perfect little loops, exactly the same size. This is why I like to do them together. They look identical when you do them together. Now we're going to place that loop on the 7mm mandrel on this side. And then we're going to take the tail end of the wire and wrap around the 9mm mandrel, like so. all the way back until you're about 5 millimeters away from that loop or those loops. Just like that. And then I'm going to pull them off of the mandrel or off of the ring or looping pliers. I'm having a hard time with my tools today. And then keeping a hold of both these ear wires together, I'm going to grab my chain nose pliers and I'm just going to give the tail end of these wires a little bend about 2 millimeters from the end. So I'm just grabbing pretty much right close to the tip. And then I give it a little bend. And there you can see I've got those ear wires shaped complete. But now I'd like to add a little flair to these ear wires. So I'm going to grab my bench block and I'm going to hammer the outside edge of these ear wires, or the side that faces the front of the ear, not the side that goes into or behind the ear. And this is going to, again, give it a nice little shimmer for the light to reflect off of, plus it work hardens that ear wire. And the reason I only do half of it is because the part that goes in the ear, you want that to stay round. It just feels better going into the ear. And there we have that done. And now I'm going to put my looping pliers back in here because when I hammered, the loop came apart a little bit. So we're just going to push it back together and get it all nice and neat and tidy. And now we're going to, after doing both of those ear wires, I'm going to grab one of my ear wires and open this loop. We're going to do that by twisting out away from the side there, not out in front. So you just want to twist the wire, not pull it out. And then we're going to put the largest loop, and then the medium size loop, and then the smallest loop, or circles, whichever you want to call them, onto this ear wire. And then we're going to close this loop back up. And this is the reason why we made this loop a 3 millimeter rather than a 2 millimeter. It's going to hold all 3 of those rings in that loop. So we wanted it to be wide enough where they could all sit side by side in that loop, like so. So now we're going to start our next step, making the bead elements. We're going to grab the 18 gauge wire that was cut at 4 centimeters, the 2 pieces, and then we're going to hammer the end of these 2 pieces of wire using our bench block and chasing hammer. And there you can see I've flattened that edge pretty good, and that's what you want to do. And then grabbing one of our 6 millimeter Jasper beads, I'm going to pop that right onto the end. And notice that bead is trapped on there. It can't go past that little splayed out end of wire. So now I'm going to take my file, and I'm just going to file the ends of this so it's not sharp and jagged, and I'm going to round that little end off into a little teardrop shape. So there you can see that rounded teardrop shape there. Just gives it a nice little look, cleans it up, and it files that down so it's not sharp and jagged and won't catch or cut anyone. And there you can see that bead sits on there just nicely. Now with my flathead pliers, which is about 5 millimeters in width, I'm going to grab that right above that top bead and then create a little 45-degree angle. So if you don't have 5 millimeter flathead pliers, you can just measure it and make sure you bend it right at 5 millimeters above that bead. And then we're going to grab right at the bend there, or just above where it bends, with our 2 millimeter mandrel. And then we're going to wrap the end of this wire around that mandrel until it comes all the way around to create a loop. And we're going to come all the way back across that wire, like so. And you want to make sure that little 2 millimeter barrel is directly centered above the wire that's coming straight up out of that bead. Now with my flush cutters, I'm going to flush cut this loop right where those two wires intersect each other. And there, we've done that. And now with my chain nose pliers, I'm going to twist this wire into place. And there I've created my loop. And there's my first bead element. Now I'm going to hammer this loop so we get a nice hardened loop there, like so. And now we're going to do our next two little beads. So with a 20 gauge wire that was cut at 4 centimeters, and these have to be 20 gauge because the hole on the 4 millimeter beads is too small to accommodate the 18 gauge wire. So now we're going to do the same thing. We're going to hammer the ends of these two wires out and make a little paddle at the end, like so. And then we're going to grab that 4 millimeter bead, place it on there and make sure it sits on there well, and it does. And then I go ahead and do the second one off camera, and I have gone ahead and filed the ends of those so you didn't have to watch me do that again. And now I'm going to put one down and just grab one of those. And with my chain nose pliers, I'm going to grab right at the top of the bead. Now before I bend this wire, I want to make sure that the little paddle at the bottom is the flat side is facing me. And then I'm going to make a bend toward me so that that bend is right at the same side as the flat side. Hope that makes sense. And now I'm going to make a little loop with my 2 millimeter mandrel on the looping pliers at the top of this bead. Sorry, I'm a little bit off view there. Here we are. And then I'm going to wrap all the way around that mandrel until those wires cross back over the top, or that wire, and try to get my looping pliers out of that loop. And now I'm going to flush cut the tail end of this wire where those two wires cross over each other. And sometimes this takes just a second to line it up just right. And there we go. And now we're going to twist that wire back into place, like so. And there we have our first bead element created. And we're going to do the same thing with this other one. So making sure that that flat side of the paddle at the bottom of the bead faces you. Placing your pliers at the very top of this bead. We're going to make a bend at the top of that bead, just like that. And then grabbing our looping pliers, we're going to make a loop going toward the back of the bead. So we're going to get that 2 millimeter mandrel right above the wire coming out of the bead. We're going to wrap this wire all the way around that 2 millimeter mandrel till it comes back across itself. And then pull the looping pliers out of the loop, grab the flush cutters, and snip that end off right where those wires cross over each other. And with the chain nose pliers, we're going to close that loop up by twisting it back into place, like so. And there's our second small bead element. And here are all 3 of those bead elements. Notice the bigger one has that longer neck on it, and that is so the smaller ones can sit up close to it. So now we're going to grab the earring that we've created so far, and we're going to hang the loops on that larger ring at the bottom there. So we're going to grab the chain nose pliers and open this loop by bending it to the side or twisting it to the side, not pulling it out away from the piece because that will misshape that little loop. And then we're going to hook that loop onto that larger outer ring and then twist that loop back into place. And there, we've attached that on. You need to make sure that you're putting your beads the right direction so that they're at the front. You want the opening of your loop to be in the back of your piece. There, I've twisted that loop open. And I'm going to place this on one of the sides of that first bead element. And then we're going to close that loop up like so. And there you can see how that smaller bead lines right, just sits right up next to that first one. And now we're going to do the second smaller bead. We're going to twist that loop open once again. Like so. And then we're going to place it on the ring on the opposite side of the larger bead. And then again, we're going to close that loop up by twisting that loop back into place. When you twist these little loops like this, it also helps to work harden those. And so now, here is one of the finished earrings. So now, with the magic of video editing, I have created this second earring off camera, so you guys don't have to watch the whole thing all over again. If you want to, you can always go back and watch again. I hope you guys enjoyed watching this video. What did you think? Let me know in the comments below what you thought. Would you do something different? Maybe add to this design? Would you use different wire or different beads? Did you like this project? I'd like to hear your feedback. All feedback is welcome, whether positive or negative. Also, don't forget to give me a thumbs up. This just lets YouTube know that you enjoyed my content, and in turn, YouTube will push these videos out to even more creative people like yourself. If you haven't already and you'd like to see more of my tutorials, then click that subscribe button. It's free, and by subscribing to my channel, you can be notified when a new tutorial is up for you to view. Thank you guys so much for your continued support. I sure do appreciate each and every one of you. Thanks for watching, and I will see y'all next Thursday.